Hey everyone, today we are going to review a strategy to use when taking the ACT English test. Today you will be completing 32 questions. The strategy we are reviewing is the process of elimination, which we discussed last week. To implement this strategy, you need to look at a question, plug in the answer choices to see how each answer choice reads and sounds, and then eliminate at least two of the answer choices, allowing yourself to choose between two possible answer choices rather than four. We're going to practice this together for questions 26. First, let's plug in the answer choices, and notice as we do this, a few answer choices may immediately pop out to you as incorrect. Typically, these are answer choices that are too wordy and lose their meaning, or answer choices that use too much punctuation, making the sentence sound incorrect when spoken aloud, especially if you pause when there is a comma or period. So let's do this together. The first answer choice is no change, so we'll read the entire sentence as it is. Establishing her own hair products business, herself in the first decade of the 20th century. Let's plug in answer G. Establishing her own hair products business belonging to her in the first decade of the 20th century. Let's plug in answer H. Establishing her own hair products business herself in the first decade of the 20th century. And then J, establishing her own hair products business in the first decade of the 20th century. Notice, looking at answer choice F, that this doesn't sound correct because the comma after business does not separate two clauses that could stand alone with a coordinating conjunction, and the clause after the comma is dependent if herself remains in the sentence. And establishing her own hair products business herself in the first decade of the 20th century is an introductory clause to the rest of that sentence. So you can't add a comma after business and have two introductory clauses together before an independent clause. That first part of this sentence, establishing her own hair products business herself in the first decade of the 20th century, that is an introductory clause. So you can't have an additional comma that would create an additional clause before the rest of the independent clause that follows. Let's look at answer choice B. This answer choice is too wordy and redundant. Establishing her own hair products business belonging to her in the first decade of the 20th century. When you read it that aloud, that is a mouthful, so it's too wordy and it's redundant. It already says her own hair products, so why do we need to add belonging to her? That is too repetitive. So let's look at answer choice C. This answer choice uses commas correctly by adding herself as an interjection. So establishing her own hair products business herself in the first decade of the 20th century. So adding an interjection into that introductory clause would not necessarily be incorrect. And then looking at answer choice J, establishing her own hair products business in the first decade of the 20th century. This is very simple, and it makes that entire clause an introductory and dependent clause. It doesn't add in any additional commas that would cause confusion, making it as if this one dependent clause is two dependent clauses, which you cannot use together with a comma. So if I were going to eliminate two answer choices, I want to eliminate A and B because F uses that comma incorrectly, making it seem as if that entire dependent clause is two dependent clauses. You cannot have two dependent clauses separated by a comma. You can have two independent clauses separated by a comma and a coordinating conjunction, and you can have a dependent clause and an independent clause separated by a comma, but not two dependent clauses. So answer choice F is going to be eliminated. And then answer choice G is going to be eliminated because it is too wordy. And again, it's redundant. So now we're going to look at H and J. H uses the commas correctly because herself becomes an interjection, and J is very simple and it's just shortening this sentence down to business without any punctuation. So that's correct. So between H and J, the correct answer choice is J because, again, for answer choice H, adding herself as an interjection is still redundant. It already says establishing her own hair products business. We don't need to say herself again because that's repetitive. We don't need that information. So the correct answer choice is J. So as you work today, use this process of elimination. And again, if you're not 100% sure how to use a comma correctly, how to use a semicolon, or how to use a colon, then pay attention to the answer choices that are too wordy. If they're too wordy, and if you read it aloud and there are too many pauses based upon the number of commas, consider eliminating those answer choices. Often the simplest, the clearest, and the most concise answer, like in question 26, that answer choice is typically the correct answer. So if you're struggling, that's a good strategy to use and to implement it using the process of elimination. Lastly, before you begin your ACT practice today, I want you to practice timing. Now, that being said, I don't expect you to time yourself within a time constraint and then be finished. Take your time with this, practice the questions. I would rather you practice them and try than to time yourself and just fly through it and not try and answer correctly. But time yourself today to see how far you get within the time constraint and then finish in your own time and pacing. But today, see how many questions you can get accomplished within 20 minutes. So that's 32 questions within 20 minutes, which is less than a minute per question. But that's the case for the actual ACT. For the actual ACT, you're taking 75 questions in 45 minutes. So you need to start timing yourself so that you can get used to the pacing of the test. But again, you don't have to finish within the time constraint today.